welcome to Inspirational Transformational TV show. Amy Whitney here today with my absolutely incredible, amazing, creative, inspirational guest, Laurie DeSenza. Laurie takes us on a journey today that spans from the time of her life where she was an award-winning designer to where she discovered esoteric astrology, burnt off past karma, proving scientifically that past lives exist, sustaining a three-way brain injury, and starting life with absolutely no baggage. Laurie throws in an absolutely beautiful love story and so many more amazing little tidbits of information. So hold on to your hats and grab the edge of your seat, because this is an absolutely incredible journey that Laurie takes us on. Enjoy the show. Laurie DeSenza, thank you so much for joining Inspirational Transformational TV show today.
Thank you for having me.
No worries. I like to start with a little bit of background information about you. And off camera we were just chatting about actually what your surname means, which is absolutely delightful. So if you can throw that into a little bit of information, I'd love to hear you explain that again on camera.
Okay. DeSenza means of the ascension. And I didn't find that out or understand that it was part of my destiny essentially until I was already teaching about ascension and the evolution of the soul and spiritual awareness and so forth by publishing Beyond Reason magazine. I started off originally as an internationally renowned designer. So I've always been very right brain dominant,
Right.
which means my senses essentially were the most dominant. And as a designer, I really wasn't even aware that other people didn't use their senses the same way. I was able to feel color, to see sound. And when I worked with flowers, for instance, I could feel the energy of the flowers, and to me they danced. They had movement, they had life. And when I arranged them, I would arrange them in the way that they felt to me. I would arrange the colors in the way that they felt to me, and that's what ended up making me an award-winning designer and internationally renowned, for my tremendous sense of color and the new types of designs that I came up with. And it was a long, long time before I understood that other people's senses weren't the same as mine. And there were interesting things that happened as well. When you're a floral designer, people come in for funeral work. Well, I'm at least a third generation medium, but it was something that I was afraid of because my mother was afraid of it, and so she, when I was a little, taught me to be afraid of it and kept telling me it was my imagination. But people would come in for funeral work, for example, and the dead person would come with them, and I'm trying to have a conversation with the people about what funeral flowers to pick, and I'm getting this other input with the person going, don't want that, I want something else, and I'd have to be diplomatically saying, well, could I make a suggestion? And what would actually happen was that the deceased person would find a way through me to let their loved ones know that they were alive and would give them a message. And so I had some really, really profound things happen as a result of that. And even after I sold my flower shop and I went into publishing, stories would come back to me afterwards when my friends would call me up and say, hey, my mom was, at her euchre meeting, and this lady was talking about going into this flower shop when her husband died. And I would finish the story, and she'd say, I knew that had to be you. And how it had, the lady would be talking about how it had changed her life because she knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that there was life after death, because how could a perfect stranger have told her things or done things that there was no way for me to have that information otherwise. So it began to alter people's lives, or I began to see that it was altering people's lives. And then people would come in and, they'd be coming in to buy flowers, but I had people who would come in and regularly hang out, and they'd ask me questions, and I'd start saying, why are you asking me that? How would you know that I'd know the answer? And they'd say, well, I don't know, I just kind of knew that you'd know. And so it began to be more of a spiritual center, I think, than it
Yes.
was a design shop. And eventually I just felt that pull that I had to start to do that, to share that information in a more cohesive manner. So I decided I was going to go into publishing. I originally started off doing Canada's first bachelor magazine. And I'm actually the catalyst for the whole internet movement and everything that's happened now, because of what I did at the time was so innovative. Originally I started off doing it to raise money for charity,
Yes.
because we were in a recession at the time. But when I was a business consultant in addition to the other things I was doing, and I had done some research that said, the married people aren't spending their money, they're banking it because the interest rates are so high. But the single people are, and they're spending it on relationships or to find relationships. So we used that concept as a catalyst to raise money for local charities. So that was my first venture. So, yet again, I was a pioneer.
Yes.
And in the process of doing that magazine, though, I had a friend who was developing a system for answering machines. Up until then, there was just traditional answering machines. There was
Okay.
no press 1 for this and press 2 for that, and different mailboxes and so forth. And he was developing this system, and it was really quite complex. And he was trying to sell it to Bell Canada at the time. And so I said to him, I've got this magazine. Could we incorporate this somehow so that the people could actually call in, hear the bachelors, leave a voice message instead of just writing in or whatever? He said, oh, that'd be great. So we developed that system. Buffalo Evening News got wind of it, called me up and said, can we have that system? We would like to do personals in the newspaper. Can we use that system for that? And I said, sure. And from there, it spun out. And so what I started turned into this whole singles movement that's just absolutely phenomenal. So, I had to become an expert on internet dating and but I was a matchmaker for a long time. But again, we're going to take that back to how did I get to be such a good matchmaker? I started the Bachelor magazine because I was the perfect matchmaker. Again, not realizing I could read people's energies. Mm-hmm. When I meet you, I see and feel your essence. Mm-hmm. I'm clairsentient, so I can feel your thoughts and your emotions. And so I was able to perfectly match people just because I would know who was the right fit.
And so you're saying you didn't realize that this is why you were so good at it. You didn't know that you had those skills.
At the time I didn't really, I mean, because they're innate and you really don't understand that everybody doesn't have that.
Right.
I didn't understand that everybody didn't have that. And then my mother called me up and she said, oh, there's a psychic development class in Fort Erie and I want to go take it. You want to come with me? And I said, okay, sure, that'd be fun. Well, then I found out about the Ontario Metaphysical Center, and so I went for testing. So that's when I discovered that all of my senses were so acute compared to other people. They did tests such as they would blindfold me and they would hand a piece of flannel, colored flannel to me, and I had to tell them what color it was. And I could tell them unerringly what color it was by how it felt. And that's when I went, oh, that's exactly what I do when I'm doing, whether I'm doing interior designing or floral design or visual merchandising, that's exactly what I'm doing. I feel it, where it wants to be, how those colors fit together and everything. And then they did tests, like they would blindfold me and put me in a circle after I'd spent an afternoon with people. They'd put the people all the way around me in a circle sitting on the floor. And I could face whatever way I want and then tell them who that person was by how they felt. And different tests like that. So that's again where I learned that I was clairsentient, because up until then I thought I was manic depressive or something, because I would feel things that I had no reason to feel angry or sad or whatever. And I just thought that I was having a breakdown or manic depressive. Well, then I discovered that what was happening was I was able to read and feel people's feelings. Well, it made me understand, again, why I was so good at what I did.
Yes.
Because innately, I had that rapport with someone. I understood how they felt. By that time, I think from the time I was 15 was when I went for my first course in counseling, where I did suicide crisis hotline. Mm-hmm. And then I took psychology courses for just as a side interest. I thought that I was manic depressive or something like that. And And then when I learned that that's what was happening, and I could turn that into a gift and meld that into the counseling that I was doing, and then I understood, this is why I'm so good at the singles and the relationship counseling and matching people together. So it was this journey of learning so much about myself and all these little pieces coming together. And then after I did the Bachelor magazine, and I had already done that sort of spiritual shift, shall we say. So I went from making $168,000 a year as a designer, and being internationally renowned and kind of being the it girl. Whenever I went I was always the one getting invited to parties and all the social events, and knowing the who's who and so forth. And then off I go, doing my Bachelor magazine. Well, I'm still kind of the it girl, because I'm so innovative and helping the local economy, and it had so many spin-offs, and it almost got out of control because it grew so fast. And but I had done this spiritual transition, and that's why I was doing it for charity. And in my mind was this, as with all spiritual people, when I'm doing the right thing, the universe will look after me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I lost about $300,000 in the space of 15 months because I was underwriting all of these charity events and things like that, expecting that the universe is going to reward me commensurate with what I'm doing. But, that's not how the universe works. When you're perfectly capable of looking after yourself, the universe expects you to do that job. It will come in on the 11th hour and help you when you are desperate and absolutely can't help yourself, and it'll rescue you every time, pull you up by the seat of your pants. And that always happened to me.
Yes.
But it will never give you more than exactly what you need, because it fully expects you to do the job yourself. Well, it took me 2 to 3 years to figure that out, and I went through a period of what I would call the dark night of the soul, because my entire self-esteem had been built on all of these superhuman achievements that I had done for 20 years. I was the youngest woman in the history of the city of Niagara Falls to start a business. I had the first craft shop in the Niagara region, bringing in artists and craftsmen and elevating crafts from the handmade mother knitting at home kind of thing to the artisan kind of juried art show level, and helped to start the Balls Falls show, which is still
Wow.
going after all of these years. So started off as a pioneer in that. Was the first in the entire region to work with silk flowers, artificial flowers, and most of them I had to make myself rather than just the fresh flowers. So all through my life I had been this pioneer, and had been hugely successful at everything I'd done. And now I'm equally successful, but no money. And it really damaged my self-esteem hugely, because it had been built on my accomplishments. Suddenly I had no money to help people or go places or do things, and it really put me in a huge tailspin crisis. Now I understand the value of it and why I had to go through that, because now part of my job is helping holistic practitioners to keep their feet on the ground and build successful practices, and not be so airy-fairy about, the universe will bring everybody to me, and helping them, to do the job. So I've now written 5 books on how to start a holistic business, and taking the knowledge that I had as a business consultant and as a successful entrepreneur, and now helping other practitioners build that as well. So that's kind of one aspect of
What you do.
Of what I do. But I had to work my way out of that, and that's what led me into esoteric astrology. In my brain, there had to be a reason why was this happening at me or to me. Okay, and I spent in 1 year 2,000 hours on studying astrology, and I learned it to such a depth and incorporated it with a lot of my other spiritual knowledge that I became one of only about 6 esoteric astrologers in North America. And as time evolved, and by then I had started Beyond Reason magazine, and Beyond Reason magazine was started because that's what I really wanted to do when I first went into publishing. But that little ego part of me kind of went, oh, everybody's going to think you're a flake, and you're kind of the it girl, and I just didn't want to go there, so I went into something that was more mainstream, socially acceptable.
Okay.
But you know, that 3 years that I was struggling in the dark night of the soul, it was niggling away at my soul, and I kept saying, well, you can't make a living at it, you know, so you can't do it, and people are going to think you're a flake, and you know, the chatter, the negative chatter went on and on and on. And then I wrote an article, and I can't remember what magazine I wrote it for, but it was something that I had been lecturing about when I was a consultant, which was about how to manifest what you really want. And what it really comes down to is what you're meant to do in life is the thing that brings you the most joy. It's the thing that makes your heart sing. That's what you have to contribute. Now for me, as a designer, that was a given from the time I was a child, because that was my sole motivation in life, was to create beauty.
Yes.
And then as I got older, and you know, as a child, when other little kids were wishing for ponies and Barbie dolls and toys, I wished for wisdom. I would read the Bible, and my brain would say, it doesn't add up, it doesn't feel right, there's something more that they're not saying, or I'm not understanding what's really being said, and I would wish for wisdom. Well, you know, eventually that came, and people would say to me, well, how do you know that? I don't know, I just know. I just know. And like Einstein, because I was constantly in that alpha state, which is a different brain wavelength when you're in the right brain mode. As a designer, I was there all the time, and so the information and the knowledge would just come to me. And then when I started the Beyond Reason magazine, and I started interviewing scientists like William Tiller and Bruce Lipton and David Suzuki and Masaru Emoto and just tons, and you know, the Russian scientists who discovered neuropeptides, and you know, I'm interviewing people who are the world's most renowned scientists in quantum physics, and they were filling in the blanks. Well, it was when I interviewed William Tiller at Stanford. He was at Stanford University, and at the time I was writing an article on electromagnetic fields and how they affect the human body, how they're dangerous for our health. And he was the top expert in that at the time. And he was working with Claris Technologies in California to develop a device that would protect us from electromagnetic fields. So as I was talking to him, he was explaining some of the experiments he'd been doing and how he had been working with photons, and he couldn't get the same results twice. And he finally realized that it was because every time he thought something, oh, I'll try it this way, and you know, the photons would respond to how he thought and would give him that result. And if he changed what he thought, then the result would change. And he went, well, how can that happen? Well, he didn't quite understand at that point. But later, when he was doing the research on how electromagnetic fields affect the human body, he discovered accidentally that consciousness is contained in your valence electrons. Now, that was such a startling discovery, because if I back the bus up here and explain, everything is made up of atoms. We know that now, right? Atoms are energy, pure energy. In reality, you are only 1/16 billionth physical matter. All the rest is vibrating energy. Now, if you take the spokes on a bicycle wheel, for example, and you spin that wheel, doesn't that wheel look solid? And if you put your finger in, it feels solid too. That's the illusion that atoms give of creating solid matter, because they're vibrating so fast, it gives that illusion. Okay? And since everything is made up of atoms, and we know that atoms are like air, I mean, atoms are in air. We're constantly exchanging atoms. In fact, every 7 years, there's not a single atom left in your body that was there 7 years ago. You're just like you're sloughing off skin and breathing, you're constantly exchanging atoms. Now, the nature of an atom is protons, electrons, neutrons. Proton is a positive charge, electron is a negative charge, neutron is a neutral charge because it's the two combined together. Okay? there's always more electrons than there are protons, and so the electrons gravitate to the outer edges of the atom, and they start circling around looking for something to pair with.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the glue that holds the universe and everything in it together. That's what holds the planets in orbit. That's what holds us together, is this electromagnetic field.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And it also is one of the principal laws of the universe, the law of attraction, because electromagnetic fields attract one another.
Mm-hmm.
In health, we know, for instance, about free radicals. Everybody hears it. Nobody knows what a free radical is. It's when an electron jumps from one atom to another and destabilizes it.
Okay.
Okay? So what William Tiller was trying to do was keep those atoms stable, because unnatural electromagnetic fields are positive charge and we're negative charge, and so it destabilizes our atoms. So in making this startling discovery that consciousness is contained within those electromagnetic fields, he verified reincarnation, because of course we're made up of atoms. Atoms are energy. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. It exists ad infinitum.
Mm-hmm.
It can take other forms. It can metamorphose, so you can take the energy of the Niagara River and harness that into hydroelectric energy, which can become light or heat or different other kinds of energy.
Yes.
But you can't kill it. It's only going to keep morphing into something different, okay? So recognizing that we're made up of atoms right off the bat proved that we are eternal, but discovering that everything we've ever thought and felt and experienced is contained in in our own electromagnetic field was astounding as a discovery, because then it proved not only are we eternal, but we do reincarnate.
Yes.
It proved all kinds of other things, such as how psychic phenomenon happens. Because if we're constantly exchanging atoms, and if everything is out in our electromagnetic field, that's how somebody like me, as a clairsentient, can feel that.
Makes sense. It's so logical.
So it, for me, solved the whole last piece of the puzzle of the entire workings of the universe, and everything became so apparent. And esoteric astrology is the science of understanding the evolution of the soul. And it actually documents, so I can tell you what your past lives were, what is missing from your consciousness and what you came to learn this time, and what you became very good at before. And I have some really interesting stories of some of the work that I've done, and you know, I did past life regression for for people and so forth, that were actually documented, historically documented.
Wow.
And one case study in particular, a lady came to me, called me right before Christmas and wanted a chart done for somebody, she said, from the 1700s. She said, "Can you do it?" I said, "Well, absolutely, I can do it, but the question is, why would somebody want that?" Because, I mean, people come to me because they want to understand who, you know who you are, you don't understand why you are who you are, right? And most people want to also understand what their destiny is, or what they really came to share. And that's why people were coming to me. But this lady's coming to me asking me to do a chart from somebody from the 1700s who doesn't even live anymore. What's the point? I said, "Yeah, I can do it." So she said, "Okay." I said, "Well, if that's what you want." And then, you know, when I did the chart, she said, "Is there any way if you can tell me what the relationship with that person might be?" And I said, "Yeah, I can do that too." So, you know, she gave me her birth information, and as I did the chart, then, you know, I made the association. So when she came for the reading, and I told her all about this man, and I got to the end of it, and I said to her, "This man is you with one life in between."
How did she know?
Well, that's a very interesting story. She said, "I thought so." And the story that I told her was of somebody who was probably a military man, and you know, very regimented. I said, he's met someone in his life, possibly older, but somebody who was much more mature, and has shown him totally changed his life and his view on life. And as a result, he adopted more of a holistic perspective on life, and left military. And as he came into the next life, then he became a holistic healer, and now that's you in this lifetime. And she was actually the head of the Green Party for Canada at the time, which I didn't know. And so that evolution made perfect sense to her. And she said what had happened was she'd been a teacher at the time, and she took the school trip to Louisbourg, Cape Breton Island.
Mm-hmm.
And while she was there on the school trip, she said she saw ghosts, which really scared her and discombobulated her, especially since when she saw them, she knew who they were and what they were doing there. And so she went back to her hotel room and she wrote the information down. And then more memories started coming to her and she kept writing them down. Well, then she went and researched and found that this person actually did live and got the whole story, because Louisbourg is so extensively chronicled in Canadian history and British history and French history, because it was the first fort that they believed to be impenetrable. It was a French fort, and the British did conquer it. And it was a really interesting story how that happened. And so it was very well documented in history. So she wrote a book about it.
Wow.
And then she was compelled to come to me to have this man's chart done. And she pulls this book out of her purse and she hands it to me and she said, "You aren't going to believe how accurate you are. I brought you this book and I'd like you to read it."
Wow.
And so you can see. And so I said, "Well, thank you very much." And so I started reading this book. And as I was reading the book, I guess I got about 3/4 of the way through, and I kind of knew what was going to be happening next.
Yes.
Okay? There was a character in the book who was a holistic healer, and she lived at the fort. She was British, where the rest of everybody else was French. And she'd been married to a coureur de bois who had died. And in the travels that she had with him, she'd lived with a lot of Indian tribes, and the shamans had taught her about herbs and things like that. So although there was a doctor at the fort, this woman, most people came to her for healing, and she acted as a midwife and so forth. She was very artistic, and she did a lot of crafts, and, and her little cottage was very beautiful and so forth. And when these prisoners, British prisoners, were brought into the fort, one was a captain and one was the lieutenant. In those days, officers were not imprisoned. It was a gentleman's honor that they were allowed, to go where they wanted as prisoners in the fort, but it was also a gentleman's honor that they never disclosed what they saw while they were within a fort.
Okay.
And that was just standard military protocol back in those days. And there was the British captain had kind of taken a shine to this woman. She had saved the lieutenant's life from tuberculosis.
Okay.
So he didn't die of tuberculosis, and he was the kingpin, or let's say the central figure of the story was this lieutenant. But on the sidebar, this woman had fallen in love with this captain. They were eventually traded. The prisoners were eventually traded, and the captain came back and captured the fort with the knowledge that he had. So it was very much a point of dishonor.
Yes.
And so the French people in the fort didn't like him at all.
Mm.
But the woman who was the holistic healer had gone to the governor because she was very psychic, and also she had been intimate with this man, and she knew he was going to come back, and she went to the governor and told him they had to protect the fort was going to be captured, and he wouldn't believe her.
Mm.
So when the fort was taken, they believed she had used witchcraft because she was a holistic healer, so she was condemned as a witch. And this captain had put her to death. He did that to save face, so that he could gain the acceptance of the French people again, and made her the scapegoat, and she was thrown into the ocean and drowned. And all my life I'd had this recurring vision from the time I was a small child of seeing myself in water, drowned, with my eyes open, and I would see myself in this dress with a little Peter Pan collar and fitted, and a long skirt, and I was sitting with my hands folded on a trunk, and the vision had haunted me for so long because it didn't make sense to me. If my hands are bound, right? But if somebody is being drowned, you're going to fight.
Mm-hmm.
There was no signs of struggle, just this woman
Exactly.
sitting on this trunk
Mm.
in the bottom of the water. And it had just so haunted me my entire life, and I'd done regressions and everything, and I couldn't reconcile it.
Mhm.
It was as I'm reading this book, I went, oh my God, now I know. And then I also understood my struggle to start Beyond Reason, because I thought that everybody would think that I was a witch, or, you know, flaky or whatever. And so there was this huge struggle going on in me, and what Beyond Reason was about was basing things on science so that I could gain credibility for the natural healing methods. And I was just relentless in that, in the research. And then I understood that's why I had to come back in this life, was to reconcile that. And the interesting thing was that the man that I was dating at the time had been an RCMP officer, I had pictures of him in the British Red uniform. His best friend was the curator of Louisbourg. He was from Nova Scotia, and he had a huge problem with me, with my psychic abilities.
Wow.
And that was the bone of contention and the discomfort in our relationship. We had to sort of push me, pull your relationship. And he felt this guilt towards me, but I didn't understand why. And suddenly the whole thing all came together and I understood. So it was just so interesting to see how past lives that we have make us who we are, and our raison d'etre, you know, to be or to do what we need to do. And so as I was doing the esoteric astrology, that's when I discovered that the name Descenso means of the ascension.
Wow. It is amazing how it's so tied together. And so if every single person went to the depth that you went, that we all have a story like that, is that right?
As I started doing people's astrology charts, and they started seeing their life from a totally different perspective, that obviously changed a lot of lives.
Yes.
You know, a lady who was a teacher, and in her soul, she wanted to be an artist, but her parents had always told her you had to get a real job. You never make money as an artist. Well, thank God when I was a kid, my parents never told me that. It never even occurred to me you could make money as an artist, and I made lots of money as an artist. But her belief was she couldn't.
Right.
She ended up, in fact, I put one of her pictures on the cover of Beyond Reason magazine, and she did become an artist, and beautiful, beautiful artist. And there were so many people whose lives changed because they got permission to be who they really were in their soul. And that, you know, starting from the time I was 15 with the counseling in suicide, you know, as a sidebar,
Yes.
has now come to this point where it's all melded together into what I do now. But that itself is probably the most interesting story. 31 years ago, I met the love of my life. I was with someone else, and he was taking me out on a sailboat, and I stepped onto the sailboat, and as I looked up, my eyes met this man's, and that was it. I instantly knew he was the love of my life. I was just totally smitten. And things at that time didn't work out. I was kind of a rising star and you know, becoming famous, and I had just been nominated for Designer of the Year for Canada, and first woman in Canada nominated to the AIFD, and he was a draftsman, and kind of didn't feel that he was right up to that caliber, and you know, again, it comes down to self-esteem and how you feel about yourself.
Yes.
And so he left and went out west. He ended up marrying someone else. I didn't want children, and I didn't really want to settle down. He wanted a family, so he went and found what he needed, and he got married. But he was the love of my life, and so I you know, turned down 14 marriage proposals over the years, and I just said the same thing to everyone. I love someone, and just because I can't be with that person doesn't mean that that love's going to ever go away. He's the love of my life. Then in 2002, I had a car accident. I hit a row of transport trucks at 60 miles an hour in my convertible. And when I had the accident, coulda, shoulda, woulda died. And here's tying back in to that past life regression. I just finished reading that book. I had just gotten the full recollection of who I was and why I was here and how I had died. And I'd been having this feeling for probably 6 months previous that I was going to die in the near future. And when I read all of this, then I kind of understood. But I still was trying to, just the knowledge of, or awareness of having that past life still didn't reconcile it. So I was still struggling with the Beyond Reason magazine and the, you know, the religious groups coming after me and the psychic attacks and all these different things. You know, I mean, it was a lot of conflict. You know, I took an industry that didn't even exist in Niagara. There were not 80 natural health practitioners, including chiropractors and RNTs, in Niagara Peninsula when I started doing this. And within 3 years, I'd grown the industry to over 300 and took, you know, the public perception from 0 to 4.7% of the population and grew it every year, so that the last survey that I did, which was the year of my accident, it had grown to 85% of the local population had tried some form of natural therapy.
Congratulations.
So it was a huge, huge, I mean, I did the first health expos, natural health expos in Niagara. I called them my See, Do, Feel expositions. And people could come and actually experience all the different therapies, try little mini samples and you know, hear lectures. And this is where, you know, I brought in people, you know, like top scientists and top experts in their field to come and speak and give presentations and really, you know, build this whole holistic community in Niagara.
Amazing.
But of course, with that is going to come a lot of controversy. So, you know, you're going to get the Pentecostals who, you know, thought I was a witch and you know, were praying for my demise and so forth. And you can't be clairsentient and psychic and not feel that and not be affected by it.
Yes.
Right? And I was getting very serious psychic attacks and didn't know what to do about it, you know, constantly trying to protect myself. And that's part of what caused the accident. But the morning of the accident, I had done a past life regression. One of my clients, who was a hypnotherapist, I spoke to her and I said, I just can't shake this past life memory. I can't reconcile it and I don't know what to do about it. And she said, well, go in and instead of doing a past life regression, do one to change the past. And if you change your cellular memory of it, then everything changes. I said, oh, you know, that just might work. So I went in and I tried it the first time, changed the scenario, came out of it and went, no, it doesn't feel any different. Tried it a second time, changed the scenario, came out of it, no, that didn't work either. The third time I said, you know what, I'm going to make it so that I wasn't even at the fort when this happened. I was back in the Indian village and wasn't even there, so couldn't get blamed, and I'm going to rewrite the history in that way. And did that, came out of it and went, oh yeah, that made a difference. I felt that. So that morning I was washing the floor in my office and the big captain's chair fell off the desk and hit me on the back of the head and knocked me out. And definitely I saw stars, but I'd never had a concussion before, so I didn't realize that I had a concussion or that I was hemorrhaging. I just thought, oh, it's really dark in here today. I really need to get out, you know, go do something. And I had 5,000 Beyond Reason magazines in my car at the time, in my convertible, getting ready for delivery on Monday. And I decided to go to the Butterfly Conservatory. And as I'm driving down the 405, and up until then, I cleaned my glasses, I cleaned the windshield, I cleaned the outside of the windshield, and I'm thinking, oh, it's really great, it's really hard to see today. But I didn't know I had occipital blindness because I'd hit the occipital lobe in the back of my head. And occipital blindness is when you look at something, but your brain doesn't register that you've seen it for maybe 30 to 60 seconds.
Okay.
So it just doesn't, for all intents and purposes, it doesn't exist, or it doesn't appear to be moving, or you can't tell if it's moving or not.
Yes.
Anyway, so I'm driving along and I'm really taking it easy because I'm going to see the butterflies at the Butterfly Conservatory, and I looked. The road was completely clear ahead of me. I looked in the rearview mirror. I saw a truck coming up behind me, big transport truck, and my brain's going, oh, should I get over? He's coming up fast. Do I get in this lane? And I looked again, and there was a white van coming up on that side. And so again, what the doctors told me afterwards was because I took my eyes off the road and I focused up close, then my eyes could see. So when I looked back, there were trucks ahead of me. But my brain went, well, they weren't there a second ago. Is this a mirage? And they really weren't clear, and I couldn't tell if they were moving or not. And you know, you have that momentary confusion with, well, what the heck? They weren't there a second ago. And I looked back in the rearview mirror, truck's still coming up on me, and I thought, well, okay, he wouldn't be gaining on me if there was really something there. So my whole brain is doing this, you know, fast calculation. What the heck? Yeah. By the time I realized that they really, really were real, it was too late. I had nowhere to go. I was trapped. And so I thought the only way that I'm going to survive this is if I accelerate and try to get in front of this minivan, who was really stupid. The stupid American should have realized, where did I have to go? He should have backed off. Yes. But he didn't. He stayed right beside me. So I had to floor it, because if I'd have hit the brakes, I'd have got squashed completely. Mm-hmm. I gunned it to get in front of him, but the 5,000 magazines shifted, and my convertible was front wheel drive, and I went up on the side and slid at 60 miles an hour down the highway, and when the tires landed, I shot right underneath the transport truck. And at the last second, as I'm looking at the Z-beam, I knew I was going to get decapitated, so I ducked at the last second, and under I went. And as I hit, my brain said, oh, that really should have hurt a lot more. There's an angel between you and that truck, because it felt like I hit a pillow. Wow. And I bounced off, and of course it sheared off the whole top of the car, which made it like a parachute, because the convertible part went back. Now it's like a parachute, so it starts spinning out, hitting the median, hitting the trucks again, and back and forth, all down the highway, magazines going everywhere. And when I stopped, I thought I was dead. I thought I was dead. And I'm sitting in my car, because I'm not realizing, of course, there's no top in the car, and I can see the sky and everything. So my brain went, oh, you're dead. And I'm sitting there going, you know, it doesn't feel any different being dead than alive. Isn't that funny? And all the truck drivers ran up, and they said, are you okay? Can you get out of the car? And I went, well, yeah. So I thought, okay, they can see me. I must be alive. The car was on fire. And they said, can you get out of the car? And I went, well, yeah. And I stepped out of the car, and they nearly passed out because, you know, I was fully intact, not a scratch on me visibly. The entire car was totally destroyed. It was L-shaped. It had been hit on every side. The only part of the car that was completely intact was the driver's door and where I was sitting. Oh. Everything else was crushed, squinched, munched, like you name it, and I was perfectly safe and not a scratch on me. But what had happened was I had a three-way brain injury, because first I had this concussion, I had the front and back impact of the brain hit front and then the back. So my brain spun on the spinal cord, as well as the other two types of damage that I had. I had dislocated 3 vertebrae in the thoracic, and rib cage dislocated from when I twisted down. But other than that, I was fine. And at the crash site, I had just 3 days before written an article on our medical system and how if you sought traditional medical care, you had a 52% chance of ending up worse than you started. And that was the latest statistics released by the CPSO, College of Physicians and Surgeons. And so that's all that's in my head. If I go to the hospital, I'm dead. I won't come out alive. I'll never recover. So I'm at the crash site, the ambulance comes out, no, I'm not getting in the ambulance, no way. And I had to sign off there, and then the police officer said, well, I can't just leave you by the side of the road. And I said, well, can I call one of my clients to come and pick me up? So I had done this article with these Russian scientists who had developed scanner therapy, and so I knew that was the thing that was going to help me, and so that's who I called. And they came and got me and took me right to the clinic and worked on me. And I had a near-death experience at that point, so of course then you get the oxygen deprivation. And as I came up out of that one, and this poor Russian doctor is having a heart attack because she's thinking, oh my God, I'm here, you know, to introduce this technology, and my first patient has died. Right? Oh my gosh. Anyway, as I recovered,
it's incredible.
It's a funny story because, I fell over, she picked me up, and she puts me on the couch. I thought I was out for maybe 2-3 minutes, because I felt myself going, right?
Yes.
I thought I was out for 2-3 minutes, and she said I was out for about an hour and 20 minutes before I came to. And as I came to, somebody else was looking out of my eyes. And it was the weirdest feeling. And I opened up my eyes, and it was like this little teeny person was inside of me, looking out of my eyes going, oh, wow. Oh, just this total awe. Like they had never actually seen out of eyes and seen physical stuff before. Just this absolute rapt awe of, oh, wow, is this ever neat? And the doctor's sitting and looking at me, and I looked at her and I said, look at my face, is this me? She said, what? I said, is this me? Look, there's somebody else looking out of my eyes, is this me? She thought I was crazy, and I said, no, there's somebody in here looking out of my eyes. Is this me? And she said, no, your face looks completely different now that you mention it. And then it gradually sort of dissipated, and it went away after a few minutes. But it was the strangest feeling. And then I found out afterwards, as I did more research, that when I had the near-death experience, there must have been some sort of an angelic being or one of my spirit guides, whatever, I don't know, that kind of came in to protect me against a walk-in or something else.
Right.
So that I could continue on and not be, somebody else. But I did really change. I changed my name to Lauren Thomas. I was a different person after that accident. And that's the story of how I came to this point, was that accident being the catalyst, because I recognized, first of all, from that regression that I'd done in the morning, that was the day in history that I had died, March the 3rd, that I had died in Louisburg, and I was meant to die that day. But because I changed the past, I didn't die.
Unbelievable.
And if you look at my lifeline, there is a complete split. I did die.
I can see that from here. Yeah.
Right?
Amazing.
So I died when I was, and got this second chance because I had changed the past.
Amazing.
Isn't that an interesting
That
story?
is so incredible.
So now we move from that point, and what happened, of course, was that in that moment that I had that accident and that brain injury, everything was gone. My entire life as I knew it was gone. I was this new person with no baggage. All the pain, all the family issues, all the baggage that we accumulate through life, in that instant was gone. My avatar master said to me, all the time my favorite saying was always, I don't do struggle. If it's struggle, that means I have to go down another path. Mm-hmm. Struggle means is the universe's way of saying, excuse me, you shouldn't be going there. Okay? And so I had always, pulled away and gone in a completely different direction. And he said to me after I had this accident, and I'm just like this totally free, innocent being now, with no baggage whatsoever, and he said, everybody else struggles their whole lifetime with hypnotherapy and past life regression and counseling and you name it, struggling, trying to overcome this baggage, and he said, leave it to you to find the easiest way possible to do it. Just bam, in an instant, gone. And it was very, very discombobulating, because I realized at that point, we have a frame of reference through the karma that we bring into this lifetime, all our past life knowledge, all the experiences that happen to us shape and form us as a person. Right. And for me that was all gone, and it was like standing on the top of a mountain with a 360-degree perspective, and I could be anything, do anything I wanted, but I had no pull in any direction. Because the karma was all gone.
Amazing.
It was done. And it was the most discombobulating feeling. And I went from being an A-type super achiever personality to the who cares, why bother? And it was very hard for people to handle. I wouldn't know how to handle a situation. Everything to me was brand new. I had no frame of reference, no social frame of reference even. Something would happen and I wouldn't know what to do, so I would just cry. It very and I went to be tested, because of course for the mental stuff. Yes. And I was using the scanner therapy to recover. Now, the neurosurgeon, when he tested me right after the accident for the brain injury, they thought, of course, it was going to be permanent. And I went, well, that'd be your belief.
Yeah.
What do you mean it's my belief? You know, that's the way that'd be your belief.
You're gorgeous.
And anyway, off I go to do the Skinner therapy. I went in 3 weeks later for my second assessment, and he said, wow, where you are would take another person 3 months normally to get to there, and you're there in 3 weeks.
Yes.
So, of course, you know, I eventually did have a full recovery. But over the course of the first year, the universe worked in the most amazing ways, because people came back into my life in sequential order to help me remember who I was.
Wow.
And it was very interesting going through all of my photo albums and all of my CV, you know, all my accomplishments and all my portfolio, and looking at my artwork, going, oh my God, I painted that. Oh my God, I did this, and you know, looking through my filing cabinets and all, and the magazines, everything that I'd done, and all the stories I'd written, and I'm looking at it like a third person, as though I've never seen this before. And wow, that's pretty amazing. I accomplished all this. But it wasn't, like, I didn't associate with it.
Yeah.
And the only thing that remained after that accident, the only memory that was there 100% firm, was the love that I felt for Sam, this man that was the love of my life from years before, that was there so fully. And I recognized as well that state that I was in is our default state, that state of joy, and pure happiness, and pure love is our natural state. Everything else we've learned to be. Everything else we've learned. It was such a profound thing to go right back to that default, and then get to pick and choose what I wanted to keep and retain, or you know, even intellectually know, but still not have that emotional attachment to it. Yes. Or you know, the lack of forgiveness or whatever just wasn't there. And of course I couldn't look after myself, so my stuff went into storage, and you know, I was renting rooms and you know, living with people while I was trying to recover. And one night I said, I was just feeling this tremendous sense of joy, and miracle after miracle had happened to me, and I was just in this state of such gratitude and joy. And I thought of Sam, and he was just such a kind, gentle being, and he always put everybody else before him, and I just somehow knew he really wasn't happy in his marriage, but that he would never leave, because he would love his children so much that he just would always put them first and put everybody else first. And I thought, if anybody deserves to be happy, it's him. So I just sent him a prayer, and I said, please help him to choose happiness. And that was it. No wish for, I want him back. I never in my wildest dreams ever thought that would ever happen. I just wanted him to be happy, because I loved him. So there was this huge, wonderful sense of joy, and I wrote it in my journal. I actually wrote it in my journal at that time, and how magical my life was. So as it turned out, on his 50th birthday, a few months later, he said to his wife, I'm 50 years old. If I don't choose happiness now, I never will. And he left to come and find me.
Incredibly beautiful.
Okay, so after making this wish, and you know, within months I kind of got my own place and everything, and Sam in the meantime left his wife to come and try and find me. Well, you know, angels were at work, because he moved right across the road from my best friend. Now normally I'd be sitting out in her veranda all the time, but of course with the occipital blindness I wasn't really allowed to drive, and I was living somewhere else, so I couldn't come to visit her. But she has this Christmas party every year, and she invites the whole neighborhood. So she had the Christmas party. Of course I'm coming to the Christmas party. She kept missing him. She knew he had moved in, that there was a new guy, and she wanted to invite him, but she just never met, you know, actually got to meet him to invite him, so he was the only one in the neighborhood who wasn't invited to the Christmas party. So you can just see these angels going, okay, the first one didn't work, the second one, Christmas party, darn, that didn't work either, okay, what can we do now? Now, she went away for 2 months after Christmas every year. She's a photographer. So she was leaving right after Christmas and going to Ethiopia. And she got to the airport, and it was a snowstorm, and so the flight was canceled. She had to come home. All snowstorm. She couldn't get into her driveway, so she parked on the road. He backs out, hits her car, leaves his name and number on her windshield.
Gorgeous.
Anyway, so she calls me up already, raving, you know, the new guy hit my car, blah, 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 blah. Does she think it's the same Sam Rotella? No. It didn't even occur to her it could be the same guy. So she never said the guy's name, but she said, you know, he was nice enough, at least honest, left his name on the mailbox or on my car, and he's going to fix my car while I'm away. Okay, fine. So there's the angels going again. Darn, that didn't work either. Now what are we going to do? So anyway, so she came home at the end of February. Of course, invites me over, so over I come. Well, as luck would have it, he bought a house on February 23rd and moved. So now he's not there anymore. Now I'm coming over and sitting on her front veranda. There's no Sam across the road. And he ran marathons, so he jogged every day, so I would have seen him.
Yes.
For sure.
Yes.
If I had gone to her place, if I had been there, would have seen him. Anyway, in the meantime, he had been keeping track of me because I was the love of his life as well. And all those years, he'd never forgot me and always thought about me. And, you know, and when I was doing readings or lecturing somewhere, he would go, but then he wouldn't have the nerve to come in. He would turn around and go home. And I would feel him. I'd be staring at the door because I'd be so sure he was going to walk in the door. And then I'd be crushed because he didn't. And then, of course, didn't know until we finally got together that he had done that. And we, you know, he told me dates, times, or whenever when he'd done it. And I went, yeah, I felt you. I knew you were coming. And then couldn't believe when you weren't there. And so this had happened through the years. And so he had been picking up the Beyond Reason magazines to keep track of me. Well, after I had the accident and the brain injury, I couldn't publish anymore. So then there he is, he's left her, and now he can't find me. Anyway, so I get my apartment, and I decided I'm going to go off and have a social life now. I'm going to go to the Rose Festival. And on my way there, I stopped at the Niagara Art Gallery, and he wanted me to do some press releases for him for this Giovanni Rotella exhibit. And I said, oh, I wonder if he's any relation to Sam Rotella. He said, who's Sam? And I said, oh, he was the love of my life 25 years ago. He said, oh, if he ever came back, would you go out with him again? And I went, oh, in a New York minute. Now that shows you the difference, you see, when your baggage is gone, because all the rest of my life, anytime anyone ever said that, I always went, oh, you can't go back again, it would never be the same, I wouldn't want to get hurt, blah, 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 blah. Your baggage gets in the way of your happiness.
Yes.
Because it builds all these little rules for you, right? So, from my mouth to God's ears, in that instant, within an hour and a half, that man was in my life. I went to the Rose Festival. I ran into somebody who I didn't recognize, but he recognized me. And I said, I've had this accident, I'm sorry. He starts bringing back all of my life. I mentioned I've got to go back to do this press release for this Giovanni Rotella exhibit. He said, oh, is he any relation to Sam? And I said, you know Sam? And he said, yeah, I work with him. And that was it. He went home and told Sam that he'd found me. He knew that Sam was looking for me. But he knew me by a different name.
Of course.
Than Sam did. So that he hadn't put it together in the beginning. And anyway, so there was Sam in my life. And we saw each other, and it was like 25 years had never happened. It was still there for both of us, and he's still the love of my life and always will be.
That is so beautiful.
So it's such a magical story for people to know that when you let go of the baggage, the possibilities in your life, the magic that can happen. And that's what led me to do the flower essences, because that's what I do now, is help people come back to that default state of who they really are and let go of all of that baggage and become free again. And so now I've helped hundreds and hundreds of people, and I help animals too, because they get stuck in the emotions just like people do. And that's what I do now, is create joy.
Before I met you, Laurie, you said, gee, an hour interview, I don't know, I've got a lot to share. And I thought, oh no, everybody finishes in an hour, but I want to hear more. So I'm going to put you on the spot because this camera's rolling.
Okay.
Will you do another interview
Oh,
with
absolutely.
me? Because there's so
tons
much
and
more.
tons of stories
There's so
to
much
share.
more, and
Yeah.
and we need to say goodbye today, but I'm just so inspired, so overawed, like just amazing what you presented today, and we haven't even touched on what you're doing right now with your healing modalities. So
Tremendous stories that I have of the people
Yeah.
whose lives have been completely altered because of one moment of, choosing these flower essences, and everything has changed their life as a result.
Amazing. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for your time today.
Well, again, thank you so much for even thinking to call me and ask for an interview. I appreciate that.
Pleasure. Cheers. Laurie, thank you so much for your time today. I am so excited to see part 2 of this interview, to hear part 2 of this interview, where we actually start going through what you're up to today, because it's really exciting, the work you're doing. Your journey is incredible. It is just so fascinating to listen to, and to be in your space is just invigorating, because really, when you say you have no baggage, it's like you are living in the moment, and I can just feel the excitement and the joy bouncing off you. It's an absolute treat and delight to have met you, and like I said, I so look forward to working with you in the future. Much love and many blessings to you, Laurie.